Hello and welcome to StratNews Global. And welcome to The Gist, a signature show on foreign affairs and security. I'm Surya Gangadharan. The Afghan pot appears to be boiling, coming to a boil all over again. There's a lot of movement visible, notably in the form of various diplomatic initiatives taken by the Biden administration. And it's important to note the following points. I have a couple of graphics to play here, so please go through them carefully. The first graphic. Continuation of the Trump policy in Afghanistan. Bringing in all of Afghanistan's neighbors and his commitment to multilateralism. So clearly, President Biden wants all his troops out of Afghanistan. They number around 2,000 plus at this moment. He appears committed to the May 1st deadline set by Trump, but is not making much of a public show about it. In fact, he appears to be focusing on a threefold path to try and get his troops out in time. This is another I've got for you to read. So that's the threefold path that Biden administration appears to be setting out on. Now, let me bring in my guest for this evening. He is Mr. P.S. Raghavan, India's former ambassador to Russia, and more from the perspective of this show. He was former chairman of the National Security Advisory Board until fairly recently. Mr. Raghavan, welcome.
Thank you very much. Great to be with you today. Thank you for inviting me.
So, before we do a deep dive, there's been some buzz going around, a controversy, if you could call it that the Russians have been trying to keep India out of the Afghan peace process. Is this accurate? What's your sense of it?
Well, the short answer to your question is yes. But we also need to qualify that to say, what is this dialogue that the Russians are doing? What is the dialogue that they're trying to keep us out of? Do we really fit into that dialogue? Right from the beginning, and this we're talking really about sometime in late 2016, 2017 onwards, Russia has had a dalliance with the Taliban. For a variety of reasons, they wanted to cultivate the Taliban. They used Pakistan in order to help them cultivate the Taliban, and they wanted to thereby insert themselves into the Afghan political process as having one card which could help in the whole process. So, in this process of cultivating the Taliban, talking to the Taliban, and using Pakistan to talk to the Taliban, there's no way India fits in.
Yeah.
And therefore, if we say that we've been left out of it, well, we didn't want to be in it either. So we have to be. Of course, they've had a number of other meetings where they had groups of countries there, and they were, many of these meetings, these Afghan meetings, were pro forma meetings. There were meetings where people read out set statements and so on. India has been part of that as well. So let's be clear about what India has been left out of, and whether India wanted to be left into that, and so on. So that's my long answer to that question.
Mm-hmm. So, given that we, don't talk to the Taliban, don't recognize them, don't want them in Kabul, what you're saying is that we don't need to be there at all. Don't we lose leverage?
No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is not that we don't need to be there at all. The point I'm trying to make is that we need to be there in a format that we are comfortable in, a format that we can contribute in, and for the purposes that towards an end game that we are comfortable with. So we are not necessarily comfortable with a dialogue with the Taliban in which we are add-ons. That's the point I'm trying to make. And we have a number of we have cards in Afghanistan. We have a number of interests in Afghanistan. As you know, we've been present in Afghanistan over the last many years in a number of economic projects. We have an excellent dialogue with the Afghan government. And by the way, many of these dialogues that you're talking about doesn't just leave India out of it, it also leaves the Afghan government out of it.
Yeah.
So we must see what we're talking, what kind of dialogue we're talking about. The Russians barely talk to the Afghan government. The Americans talk to the Afghan government from time to time in a pro forma manner. So this is the kind of dialogue we're talking about. I mean, look, the Afghan peace process today, what you call a peace process, is the US trying to find an exit from Afghanistan on honorable terms in implementation of a promise that various US presidents have given to their people. And then this is a promise that President Biden apparently wants to keep, though it is a Trump promise. And therefore, this peace process is a method by which you can exit from Afghanistan. Whether the Biden administration is going to do something a little different from the Trump administration is something we need to wait and see. As you said yourself in your introduction, the outlines of the Biden plan are not very clear at the moment. The commitment to move towards the withdrawal has been very clearly stated. And that has been stated also by the fact that Ambassador Khalilzad has been retained as a special envoy. In fact, he's one of the very, very few Trump administration officials that the Biden administration has retained. And that itself says something. So let us wait and see. I mean, it's still unclear how this whole process is going to work out. And you know, this 3-point program that you mentioned also in your introduction about having a United Nations organized conference, a conference in Turkey, and I mean, all these, we'll have to see where they come together.
So this, do you find it curious that two of the countries the US has sanctioned, Russia and Iran, also find space in this proposal, in this initiative by the US? Is that curious?
I frankly don't find it curious, and there are two different reasons why Russia and Iran are there in that grouping. Now, as far as Russia is concerned, throughout these last at least 2 years, that there has been this huge standoff, face-off between US and Russia and the West in general. There has been quiet cooperation on Afghanistan all along, and some not so quiet cooperation as well. Actually, if you go back as far back as February 2019, when Russia organized a kind of a so-called intra-Afghan dialogue where they brought in Afghan political groups, they brought in the Taliban, and it was organized in Moscow, allegedly by the Afghan community in Russia. The Americans tacitly supported it. In April, when this same format moved to Doha, where they even managed to persuade the Afghan government to send some Afghan government representatives in their private capacity, the US was even more openly supportive of this. In fact, Secretary of State Pompeo telephoned President Ghani to say, when the Taliban objected to the composition of the delegation that President Ghani had identified, Secretary Pompeo telephoned President Ghani, to say that, look, why don't you sort of make some adjustment and accommodate and send a delegation which will be acceptable to the Taliban. So behind the scenes, they have been working together. And the same month, actually, sometime in, I think it was in April 2019, that formally the special representatives of the US, Russia, and China had a meeting. And this is not the first time, this is not the last time either. They've had a number of meetings, but this meeting was particularly noticeable because they met to discuss the Afghan political settlement. As usual, of course, the Afghan government was nowhere on the scene. But they also actually virtually issued a certificate to the Taliban in that meeting, the three of them, saying that the Taliban is actively fighting against ISIS. The Taliban has promised that it will not accommodate or not have any truck with the Al-Qaeda, with the ATIM. ATIM, of course, is the organization that is fighting for the Uyghurs, the East Turkestan. So So, they actually issued a certificate for the Taliban and said the Taliban should be brought into the processes of settlement. So it's not surprising. And then in February 2020, when the agreement was signed in Doha between the US and the Taliban, Ambassador Kabulov, who is the Russian special envoy of the Russian president, he was invited to it. So there has been cooperation and there has been a public acknowledgement also in the US of Russian help in getting the Taliban to the table. So this is an old process. Now, as far as Iran is concerned, I think it ties in with what the candidate Biden and then the President Biden has been saying of trying to draw Iran into the nuclear deal or something akin to the nuclear deal. So you are now, you don't have this the very harsh position that the Trump administration has taken on Iran. So what better than to take this out of the nuclear deal context and to recognize Iran as a neighbor of Afghanistan, which it most certainly is. And it has also its own contacts with the Taliban, which everybody knows about as well. So I think it is quite logical that you should invite Iran. It's quite logical that you should invite Russia for these two separate reasons. And to make a show of actually this multilateralism, which the Biden administration from day one has been saying that it will consult with friends and partners and not take unilateral decisions. So all of this ties in. Except that you please notice that they have kept this grouping in the UN separate from the actual negotiations that they're going to do in Turkey. Unlike one process which you look back to, where the two processes were merged together.
Yeah. Now, when you look at it, Iran has also a very complex relationship with the Taliban. They've been supporting them. They've suffered at their hands. It's a very complex relationship.
Well, actually, every country is taking decisions which will protect its own interests. Now, essentially, the Taliban, obviously, as a group, has launched terrorist attacks against Shias and against Iran as well. But from Iran's perspective, they have the US in Afghanistan, which is an implacable enemy. So, you're trying now to see how you can use maybe the lesser enemy and a common enemy of your lesser enemy to increase your leverage. And this is basically what you're looking at.
Yeah. Now let's look at the Russians. What do they want in Afghanistan? They want the Americans out, so they are cooperating with them to get them out sooner. Is that it?
See, actually, the Russians have said at various points of time that the Americans being in Afghanistan really is not that much against their interests. I mean, though they may not say this publicly, they've been saying this publicly. But what is the Russian interest in Afghanistan? I think it is threefold. First and foremost, they I don't know in which order it works. But let us say one is that they want to be present there in order to have some leverage with the US and with the West. Russia, ever since 2014 at least, Russia's aim in all these theaters, these difficult theaters, is to collect bargaining chips to prove themselves relevant, to fight against the isolation, political and economic isolation that the US and the West is trying to push Russia into. So if you look at Russian actions in Syria, Russian actions in Libya, Russian actions in Iran during the JCPOA and thereafter, and now Afghanistan, they are trying to see that they have influence in the process that acts as a bargaining chip with the US. So that is one. Second, what the Russians have been saying is happening, whether it's happening or not, what they fear may happen, is that they feel that there is pressure on their entire periphery from Western and Western influenced forces, which threaten Russia's security. So, you have an Afghan border with Central Asia as a very porous border, and the Russians have been alleging that the ISIS and other terrorists from Iraq and Syria have been facilitated to travel to Afghanistan near the Central Asian borders so that they can be pushed inside. Whether it is true or not, The fact of the matter is that they feel that this may be possible in the future. So they need to be present in Afghanistan in order to prevent any such infiltration taking place, which also explains why they want to be in with the Taliban, as they see that Taliban will be in future in some form or the other in the administration in Afghanistan. The third point, of course, is that they want influence in the region. We had a period of time, a long period of time, when Russia-India relations were exclusive.
Absolutely.
Now, as long as these relations were exclusive, they did not really want to look at Pakistan. They did not want to create a rift in relations with India. Now, there is no longer that exclusivity in relations with India. So India is looking elsewhere. Russia also is looking elsewhere in the region to expand its influence and to expand its presence there. So I think a mix of all these factors, I don't know which is the order of the hierarchy of importance, but all these three factors, I think, motivate Russia's presence in Afghanistan. And they do understand that, or they do feel that eventually the Taliban, in one form or the other, in one guise or the other, in some proportion or the other, will be present in a future dispensation in Afghanistan. And that is something that you and I can't shut our eyes to either.
Yeah. So that explains the Russian outreach to Pakistan.
Yes, it's one of the reasons for Russian outreach to Pakistan. A very important reason. The important reason is that Pakistan facilitated their links with Taliban, but not necessarily the only reason. There's no reason why Russia should not build economic relations with Pakistan. There's no reason why Russia should not build other relations with Pakistan. Pakistan has actually, when it fell out partially with the US, Pakistan has actually voted with Russia in a number of United Nations initiatives that we have actually abstained in some cases. So, and now you see, actually, this is a source of, at least it is something that we should be watching with greater care. The military-to-military links between Russia and Pakistan. It's not necessarily arms sales. Arms sales have not taken place. Not much arms sales have taken place. But the military-to-military links, the sharing of doctrines, the sharing of tactics, this is something that seems to be happening between Russia and Pakistan. It is something we need to watch out for.
Let's come to China. What is China's game here? Is it entirely commercial, driven by the BRI need for the BRI to kind of spread, expand?
Actually, if you look at Russian interest in Afghanistan, this is where our interests actually converge. What do all of us want in Afghanistan? We want a stable Afghanistan. Democracy or no democracy is not something that, I mean, these are all mantras. But you want an Afghanistan, that is stable. And you want an Afghanistan that does not export terrorism, extremism, radicalism in any direction. And there, I think Russia, China, India all have exactly the same objective. How you reach that objective, you have different paths to that objective. So China is certainly interested that, radicalization and extremism and terrorism does not flow out of Afghanistan. After all, it's not far from Afghanistan. So it's interested in that. It is interested, of course, in the economic opportunities of Afghanistan, but that will come only at a stage when there is stability and peace in Afghanistan. So that's some distance down the line. Now, everything that Russia is doing, everything that China is doing is to create a situation where in this period they are protected. So whether it is dalliance with the Taliban, whether it is a presence in Central Asia, which the Chinese are doing, I mean, Chinese presence in Tajikistan is quite significant now. Now, all of these are basically protecting their interests in this period, in the run-up to hopefully sometime when Afghanistan will be stable.
So then finally, now let's come to Pakistan. Does the Taliban administered Afghanistan, is it in Pakistan's interest? What role do you think they are playing here? Is it just a facilitator? What is it?
Yeah, this has been discussed ad nauseum in various fora, particularly in Track 2. I think all of us need to recognize that the region of 2021 is not the region of the 1990s. India of 2021 is not the India of 1990s. And Therefore, the Taliban of 2021 cannot really be the Taliban of the 1990s. So, eventually, whatever Pakistan's game plan is, yes, Pakistan has been supporting Taliban. Pakistan has been trying to push the Taliban into pole position. That is because they want to get the present Afghan government and India out of Afghanistan. That is an important motivation there. But if and when a Taliban government comes in whatever form it comes in, and whatever proportion of Taliban there is in that government, I don't think it's a given that they will be puppets of Pakistan.
Yeah.
They also have to look at their political situation in the region. They have to look at are they going to accept the Durand line, which the Taliban never did even in the 1990s.
Yeah. True, yeah.
Are they going to who is going to rehabilitate that country? I mean, you can rule that country, but you still need to now do economic reconstruction. Where is it going to come from?
Yeah.
Where is the assistance coming from? It's not coming from Pakistan. So there are various reasons of state which will determine a ruling Taliban government. You know, the outlook of a revolutionary or a freedom fighter is very different from the outlook of a government.
Yeah, yeah.
And most revolutionaries behave very differently when they come into government.
Yeah.
And there is a realism that then governs their outlook. And I think this is what in India also this nervousness about a Taliban government we need to recognize also, that we are not the same as in the 1990s. We are not hapless victims of Taliban-sponsored terrorism in India. And the Taliban, I'm sure, recognizes that well. I mean, they've tried to convey this message to our representatives at various places, but we've likely not responded to that. But I think eventually a Taliban government would also have to be realist.
Yeah, yeah. So what would you say we should be doing now? Should we be reaching out to the Taliban, acknowledging the fact that these are major players, they could be in power tomorrow? Should we change the line that we've been following for so long?
Look, the point is, what do you gain today by reaching out to the Taliban? What are you going to do? Do you have influence over them? Is there anything that you can do for them that helps them form the government? So, just reaching out for the sake of reaching out is really doesn't make sense. Sitting at the same table with them doesn't make sense when you have nothing in common right now.
Yeah, true.
If you finally reach a Taliban government, you will deal with it. You're a government, you'll deal with it. You're a country, you will deal with Afghanistan. So I don't see, the more things are moving in the direction that they're moving, the less persuasive is the argument that you suddenly reach out to the Taliban and say, I'll sit down and talk to you. What do you talk to them about?
Yeah. So in this entire muddle that we see, various initiatives being attempted, is it better that we kind of stay on the sidelines and see what's going on, rather than get involved in something which perhaps we're not ready for, or may not be prepared for, may not like?
No. You see, where is this question of being involved? How do you get involved? If there are international meetings, yes, you will attend those international meetings and you will express your views. You will see whether you can persuade countries to follow a particular path. Yes, you will try to see whether you can persuade the US that their withdrawal has to be an orderly withdrawal, that they have to at least make sure that some of the gains of these last 21 years are preserved in Afghanistan, and that it should not be a headlong flight out of Afghanistan. These are the things that we need to be looking at. We need to be talking to other countries to see that they also apply the pressure to make sure that any exit from Afghanistan is orderly and leaves behind a functioning system in Afghanistan rather than a free-for-all, which is in nobody's interest.
Yeah.
So this is what getting involved is all about, not just attending meetings for the sake of attending meetings and making statements for the sake of making statements.
So, in your own assessment, given how given the that Blinken letter and the manner in which it was conveyed to the Afghans, very peremptory, and it seemed like a sellout to many of us. Given how the scenario is playing out and the urgency on the part of the US to get out of there, it would appear inevitable that the Taliban government will move in at some point.
Well, you see, as I said, some element of the Taliban in some form or the other, in some proportion or the other, will probably eventually be in the government in Afghanistan. But let's not at the moment take it as given as to what the Biden administration is going to do, because the Biden administration, yes, there is one commitment which it has taken from the Trump administration, which is that we shall withdraw from Afghanistan. But there are also elements in the Biden administration's foreign policy which include human rights, which include democracy, and they're talking about democracy and human rights in Myanmar. Now, they would be the Trump administration, on the other hand, made no bones about the fact that they didn't care for these things. So when the Biden administration implements the promise of a Trump administration, they do have to be a little bit more delicate about the manner in which they go about doing it. Let us see where that leads us.
Do you see go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Do you see the prospect of perhaps the Americans continuing with the troop presence, perhaps even increasing it?
I think in an overt form that is going to be very difficult, because American troop presence anywhere outside has become very unpopular. And that is the reason why the Biden administration has actually, there are very few of the Trump initiatives that they have taken on, but this is one of them that they have taken on, of a vacation of American troops. So it is actually popular to withdraw troops from Afghanistan, and it would be unpopular not to do so. Having said that, we must remember that the Americans have made a huge investment, both financial and in terms of military and in strategic terms in Afghanistan. And Afghanistan is strategically a very, very important location, which I think any US administration will have to think about seriously and make plans for. Therefore, will there be some other form of US presence in Afghanistan? It is something that should play out. But essentially, I would say that having invested so much in military terms, in human terms, in strategic terms, and economic terms in Afghanistan, if I were a US strategist, I would not want to withdraw all of this overnight.
Last question, sir. Do you see a role for the UN here?
Where have you seen a role for the UN in recent times? The UN today, you say, even if you leave out the 190 odd countries that form members of the UN, the membership of the UN, the UN Security Council, and then in that the P5, they are supposed to be the arbiters of peace and security in the world. They are a hopelessly divided lot. They're a hopelessly polarized lot. Besides, their unrepresentative nature doesn't really give them the moral authority to impose their will on anywhere in the world. So where is the role of the UN, certainly in peace and security issues? The organizations that look at economic, financial architecture, they still have some credibility, they still have a role. But the UN as an arbiter of peace and security, well, we are now on the Security Council. We will be facing the problems of this enormous polarization. But I don't see in this present form how it can contribute meaningfully in a manner that has wide acceptability.
Well, I think that's the note to end on. We appear to be clearly on the path towards another peace process in Afghanistan. Which direction it will go, what will be the eventual result, nobody really knows. But for the time being, we all appear to be in the same game as everybody else. And let's see how things go forward. Ambassador Raghavan, pleasure talking to you, sir. And thank you very much. That was very illuminating. And for all of you out there watching us on our website, on Instagram, keep following us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. And do keep coming to our site for more on security and foreign policy analysis. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.